I'd like to first be quite clear that this video isn't about the difference between sorcery and so-called high magic. Those are unrelated concepts which I've talked about in other videos and will no doubt again cover in the future. This video is about the left-hand path. In order to give you as accurate an idea as I can of what the left-hand path is, considering how contentious the topic is, how misaligned existing definitions are, and how emotional the topic can be for some, I'm going to need to build up a bit of context. It's very difficult to keep an entirely detached attitude towards what's known as the left-hand path. Whether it's a deep attraction or a deep revulsion or even just a tentative interest, I think it'd be quite hard to find anyone with any spiritual inclination who felt nothing but indifference about it. Naturally, everything being a matter of perspective, many people following an exclusively right-hand path don't necessarily even realize that what they're following is indeed a right-hand path tradition until they discover that such a thing as a left-hand path even exists. However, I do worry that many people in the West approaching what they imagine to be the left-hand path may develop a warped idea of what the left-hand path is, based on their previous misconceptions of what the right-hand path was supposed to be. By the way, if you like my content and you'd like to support my channel, you might like to consider a membership which gives you access to the Foolish Fish Discord chat server. Alternatively, of course, hitting the like button and the subscribe and bell buttons also really help if you feel that membership's not quite for you yet. Okay, back to the content. Let me start off, maybe, by describing what the Western common misconception of what a right-hand path is, just to start building up that little bit of context I was mentioning. I don't think I'm going to surprise anyone by saying that the main tradition, which has influenced Western society over the past 1500 years, has been a state-sanctioned form of Christianity. Wherever government becomes involved with spirituality, the spiritual attainment ceases to be the focus of that tradition, and defense of an identity starts to become the whole point. And so after Constantine legalizes Christianity in the 4th century CE, we start to see Christianity less as a method for an individual approach to the divine, and more as a philosophy of good against evil, right against wrong, which naturally opens a path which is very convenient for a warring, expansionist state such as the Roman Empire, who can now say, we are good, they are bad, let's destroy them for the glory of the state-sanctioned idea of God. Of course, it doesn't take very long for that weaponized ideology to be turned internally against inconvenient members of any given society, for example, self-empowered women during the Dark and Middle Ages, who can now simply be disposed of with a simple rumor that they worship Satan. A little side note on Satan maybe, though I intend to go into a little bit more detail in a subsequent video. You may be interested to know that Satan, not to be confused with Lucifer by the way, though that's yet another whole video in itself. So Satan only makes 2 appearances throughout the Hebrew Bible, and both times as an assistant to Yahweh. The ideas of Satan as a ruler of hell, some kind of Tartaros-like underworld, are absolutely apocryphal, and only start gaining traction in the last few centuries before the Common Era. And then it's finally with Dante and Milton that the idea really settles at the forefront of public belief. But these are not biblical views. Anyway, as I was saying, this arch-nemesis, this opposite to all goodness, Satan, becomes a perfect reason for justifying the removal of anyone who's getting in the way. I cheat on my wife, she finds out, I accuse her of witchcraft, which I equate to Satanism, and suddenly her word is completely disregarded. Best case scenario, she's imprisoned or even burnt at the stake. In either case, I get to continue with my affair unhindered. My political rival has an advantage over me. Accuse him of devil worship, and the way is free for me once again. I'm actually amazed that this tactic is still very much live and kicking in the 21st century, and that it works. Now, fast forward, almost but not quite, to modern day when the old state-sanctioned church is no longer the stronghold of power that it used to be. New incarnations of the old institution still have a terrifying amount of power in certain places, it's true. But on the whole, when compared to, say, 600 years ago, the church is now more of an inconvenience to the rich and powerful, who have rather turned to the media as a source of power, a much more convenient tool which they can mould to their will, and doesn't shine such an evident spotlight on their own hypocrisy, especially if they own it, and can actually use it to show their own lifestyle as something desirable and even worthy of praise. So as a direct result of this, individualism is at an all-time high, and the idea of a tradition which, in theory at least, promotes chastity, modesty, generosity, kindness, selflessness, is very much rejected. These are all qualities which get in the way of the new ideals of status and power. And the Church's many unforgivable sins of the past have given to more than a few people a perfect reason to reject it. And along with it, any idea that may have ever been associated with it, including the concept of divinity, let alone love for divinity. And so in the mid-20th century, when evidence has become unmissable that trust in a tribal god may be misplaced, we start to see the rise of groups of people who claim to directly oppose the established state-sanctioned idea of divinity, with probably the best-known leader of such a group being Anton LaVey, the founder of the Church of Satan, who was, by his own admission, a complete atheist who didn't in fact even believe in the existence of Satan, but whose organization set out to shock people out of what he considered to be their blind acceptance of the individualism inhibiting morality and beliefs of the church system. But some people miss the point. And in the 60s and 70s, we start seeing the rise of actual murders by people who claim to be following a so-called left-hand path. The Charles Mansons and Ian Bradys of this world. All the way up to the present day, where just last week a horrific double homicide occurred, where the perpetrator cited a famous left-hand path internet personality as a source of inspiration. Though I have to admit that exactly what anyone could find inspiring about that individual eludes me. Okay, here's where I start to take objection against using the term left-hand path for this sort of thing, and where we start maybe approaching a definition. The name left-hand path comes from the Tantric Indian tradition, and it's a spiritual path that explicitly seeks the face of divinity within the aspects of life that most consider ugly, taboo, or subversive. For instance, the Western misconception of Tantra as a highly sexualized tradition comes from a single tantric practice. It's the practice of having sexual intercourse in a ritualized context with someone who is not your husband or wife. Now you have to realize just how taboo extramarital relations were, and are still, in India. So this practice isn't about condoning an act that the practitioner wishes to perform anyway, but just isn't allowed to do. It's about precisely performing an act which repulses the practitioner. In fact, it's expressly forbidden to carry out this rite with someone to whom you're attracted. It would defeat the whole point. So this practice is not mandated for someone who wouldn't find this repulsive. In the same way, they're expected to consume meat, but only because they're vegetarian. There would be no point in the same practice for a meat eater. Followers of the left-hand path are known to work at morgues, handling dead bodies, something which again is extremely taboo in Indian society. Practices might even include such gut-wrenching stuff as eating a dead body's brains out of their open skull. But while all of these acts sound not just disgusting but horrifying to most people, it's kind of to the point. After all, as I mentioned, the objective of the left-hand path is to find God in the lowest places. There's a difference that's hard to miss between these acts, which cause no harm other than revulsion and a deep sense of offense, on one hand, and actually knowing and willingly causing suffering on the other, whether it's to a human or to the most seemingly insignificant of beasts. There's plenty of ugliness in the world in which a left-hand path practitioner can practice finding the face of God without needing to go on to generate more of their own. The tantric left-hand path is known to be the most difficult of all the spiritual paths, as it's a path of complete self-denial and poverty and hardship, but people choose to follow it because it's also known to be the fastest route to breaking the cycle of rebirth and attaining nirvana, or oneness with the Godhead. Now transpose this to the Western setting we just mentioned, where unity with God has become seen as undesirable. And while it's evident in the Left-Hand Path publishing world that a handful of people do clearly get it, and have managed to use the existing Western paradigm to recreate a rather beautiful, locally relevant equivalent of the Indian source, it's also abundantly clear from social media, and even some book publishers too, that plenty of people don't get it. And so we get these nonsensical situations where, rather than Satan being worshipped as a necessary aspect of divinity, he's worshipped as the opposite of God. And suddenly what you get is a philosophy which has nothing in common with the Tantric Left-Hand Path. And I'd even go as far as to say that it's directly contrary to the objectives of what a Left-Hand Path should be about. There's nothing spiritual about a path which seeks worldly wealth, power, lust, and ultimately the inflation rather than the deflation of ego through the destruction of others. That's just basic worldliness. You don't need a path to do that stuff, just an MBA or a master's degree in politics and you're good to go. No dressing it up in fancy spiritual terms is going to make it more edgy or less pitiful. A path which rejects divinity is not a spiritual path, regardless of whether it deals with spirits or not. And it ends up being just as deluded and as destructive as its opposite path, which rejects the world and all its shadows, as the church did for so many centuries. Living in denial of either the light or the dark aspects of the human condition can only lead to suffering. The common point between the witch-hunting Spanish Inquisition and someone sacrificing their pet cat to a demon for a chance to get laid is the lack of love. One way or another, if love isn't at the core of your practice, left hand or right hand, then you've missed a step and you seriously need to reconsider what you're doing. Now here are some great sources on the left-hand path that I can recommend that give a good idea of what the left-hand path actually is. First of all, At the Left Hand of God by Stephen Svoboda, where Svoboda relates from memory the stories and sayings of his deceased left-hand path tantric guru. It's eye-opening stuff, sometimes a little fantastical, but always challenging, at the same time as being entertaining. Another great book is Ororai by Gabriel Macari and Joseph Gabriel Alegria Sabogal, which is a beautiful left-hand path work of art designed to work on many dimensions, to work upon the reader in ways which will unlock certain paths of understanding. I'm aware that at the time of recording this one's out of print, but I believe that Anathema have announced that there will be a paperback edition in the near future. I'll certainly add a link in the description when that eventually happens. The Cult of the Black Cube by Dr. Arthur Moros, currently in its second edition at Theon Publishing, is a terrific introduction to the Western left-hand path cult of Saturn, a much maligned and much feared aspect of the Olympian pantheon. And Sultri Malioni's Feeding Your Demons is also a great one for introducing a little necessary shadow work into your practice. The simple but very beneficial process she suggests can be easily and safely appended to any right or left-hand path tradition you might be following. And then finally, here's one you may already have on your wish list at least. The very excellent Tantra Illuminated by Christopher D. Wallace is the perfect, complete overview of the various tantric traditions of the left and right hand paths, as accessible and useful to the absolute beginner as it is to the advanced veteran. I can't think of a more authoritative source, and if you don't own a copy, it's definitely a good one to consider. Right, now, as you know, this can be a touchy subject, and as always, but maybe with a little more emphasis this week, I'll ask you all to be especially considerate in your interactions with other people in the comments. This is a complicated topic, with as many flavours as there are practitioners, and I'd be very sorry to see any unkind handling of opposing views. I regularly read comments about how civil the comments section of the Foolish Fish community is, and honestly, it's one of the reasons why I love creating these videos so much. There's also a very new LHP channel on the Foolish Fish Discord server that all members get access to, and which you might like to come and share your thoughts on. Membership starts at just $2 a month and gives you access to these Saturday videos 1 week before anyone else, as well as an array of other perks that you can read all about in the video's description below, or by hitting the join button next to the subscribe button. Let me just take a moment now to extend my heartfelt gratitude to all the members who so kindly support this channel. I most definitely wouldn't be able to do what I do here if it weren't for you, and honestly, every single one of your contributions goes straight to my heart. I'm regularly hit by how lucky I am to have such an amazing group of interesting, considerate, and thought-provoking people around. Thank you. Really, it means the world to me. Now, of course, if you want to help support the channel for free, as I mentioned before, then another thing that you can do is just to click on the like button and, of course, to hit that subscribe button and the little bell button if you haven't done so already. And thank you, finally, to every one of you who've made it to the end of this video. Take care of yourself and of each other, and see you very soon with another video.